In this video, we're going to be talking about transitions and animations. Transitions and animations are things that you should add to your presentation to enhance the presentation. You need to remember that most times when PowerPoints are used, they are used to be able to provide information to an audience. And so typically you might see speaking points on a PowerPoint presentation, and then they can be converted into notes pages and handouts given to the audience during a presentation so that they have something that they can jot notes down on and take things with them. It is never the intent of a PowerPoint to have everything that you want to say on the slides, because that just becomes cumbersome for you as a presenter and your audience as well, and it's difficult to keep them engaged. When we're working with transitions and animations, first you need to understand the difference between the two. So a transition is how you're going to move from slide to slide. So how am I going to transition from slide 1 to slide 2 to slide 3, etc. In this example, I have a very brief 4-slide presentation just to kind of take a look at the presentation. I can tell by visually looking, because of experience, that this is a title slide layout. If you click the drop down on layout, you will see that it's the title slide. The next slide is a content slide. So if I click the drop down, it says title and content. You can make a slide active by clicking on it in the navigation pane. And so the third slide is also a title and content slide. And the last slide is reusing a title slide. And most people wouldn't think, oh, how can you reuse a title slide for your last slide in your presentation? In any presentation, you should have a title slide and then some sort of a summary or conclusion or ending slide. And the end slide just shouldn't say something like the end or thanks for watching. It should provide your audience with a little bit of information. So in this particular presentation, there are 2 different slide layouts that have been used. It also has used a theme. As we review a little bit what themes are from the Design tab, you can choose a theme. This is the organic theme. It's used on all slides. They also have variations of those themes, so you could hover over, because of live preview, the different variations to see what that would look like if you chose a different variation of the current theme. So now for transitions, how am I going to go from slide 1 to slide 2 to slide 3 to slide 4? The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make the first slide active, and I'm going to click on transition. You can click the More button. If you click that drop down arrow, you're going to see that you have some subtle transitions, you have some that are really exciting, and then you have some for dynamic content. What you need to keep in mind when you're working with transitions is you need to be consistent. And so when I say consistent, you don't want to use something like random, because what that's going to do is every time you go through your PowerPoint presentation, it's going to give you a different transition, and it could kind of throw you as you're presenting your presentation because of what it's doing. And some of the transitions are kind of cool. And so when you click on a transition, you're going to see what it looks like. So for instance, if I click on fracture, it's going to show me what that looks like. Is that something I need on that first slide when I'm beginning to present? Is it professional? Is it not professional? So you can click on various transitions to see if you feel like they're appropriate. The one thing that I will say is usually the simpler the presentation, the better, unless you're doing, a presentation that really needs to be upbeat. So I tend to stick with the subtle transitions, and honestly, quite basic. Something like the push transition, or the wipe transition, or the cover or uncover transition. Something that is not going to be distracting for your audience, and it's just going to seem natural that it's happening. So When I say consistent, notice that when I click on a transition, it puts the little action star next to it, which a transition is kind of like an animation. And so I can see on slides 2, 3, and 4, I don't have anything applied. So as I'm looking at my slide, how do I want this slide to appear to my audience? Do I just want it to be there? What do I want it to do? So if I were to go ahead and choose uncover, for instance, you have over here effect options. So how do you want it to uncover? Do you want it to uncover from the right? Do you want it to uncover from the top? Do you want it to uncover from the left? How do you want that to appear? I think maybe I will go ahead and go over here to the wipe transition, and I'm going to click the drop down. Do I want it to wipe from the top? Do I want it to wipe from the bottom? Do I want it to come from the left, the right, from the bottom right? So you're still maintaining a consistent transition. You are just simply changing the effect for that transition. So that's something that you want to keep in mind as you're working with your effects. So in this particular case, maybe I just want this one to appear from the top. Now, you have the option of applying a transition to all of your slides at once. So if you want that transition applied to all of your slides, you can click that. And now you're going to notice if I go to play this this presentation from the beginning and I click, I'm going to get that same transition all the way through. If you're not happy with that transition and you want it to be different, then I could click on slide 2, and instead of it coming from the top, maybe this one is going to come in from the left. Maybe the second one's going to come in from the left. Maybe the last one is going to come up from the bottom. So again, if I come back and I click on my Start from Beginning icon, it's going to start my presentation from the beginning, even though I was on the last slide. And then I can go ahead and mouse click to go to the next. That came in from the left. That one came in from the left. And the last one came in from the bottom. And it was quite quick that that transition appeared as it came in from the bottom. So you can go ahead and set your transitions however you want within your presentation, just so long as you're staying consistent. So again, in terms of being consistent, make sure that you're picking a transition, and then you can go ahead and you can modify, if you want, the effect options. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is animation. And so I want to go out and find a quick example of a resume image. So I'm going to go to Insert, I'm going to go to Online Pictures, and I'm going to go ahead and search for resume. And it's going to pull up different examples of resumes. Now, again, something that I want to just bring to light, when you're working with images like this off of the internet, it's going to be very difficult, quite honestly, for any audience to be able to read what's on the actual resume. And so, do you want a picture of an actual resume? Do you want an example of clip art from a resume? So if I would type resume clip art, I get some different examples. And quite honestly, there's nothing wrong with an image such as this, depending on how professional you want it to be. So if I double click this to add this into my document, I can then go ahead and move it. If I want to make it a little bit larger, I can make it a little bit larger. But I just want you to see how that looks. You're just talking about resume styles. I could go back in and do an insert and go back to Online Pictures and just type resume like I started with. And if I want to pick an example of a resume, they're going to give you lots of different examples of resumes. But if I just go ahead and click on, we'll do this one because it's got a little color. I'll double click that to add that to my presentation. And so I can reduce that down in size. If you think that that is a good example of a resume, that would be something you could use. You just have to make sure that it fills the space that you're working with. And so in this particular case, yep, there's a resume there. My audience really isn't going to be able to see what it is, but that just becomes a personal choice. So I think what I'll do is I will just go ahead and we'll delete the clip art one, and we'll just go ahead and we'll leave the example of an actual resume. And so what I've done is I've added an object to my slide. The one thing you want to keep in mind with animations is you do not want to animate everything on a slide, nor does a slide have to contain animation. So when the title slide appears, it can transition right to the title slide, and that's fine. There doesn't need to be anything else on there. I don't need anything flying in, spinning in, detracting my attention. If you want to, you can. It depends on what it is that you are wanting to get across through your presentation. If I click on the second slide, I have some bulleted items that I could transition in, and I have an image here that I could transition in. You can, if you want, leave the credits on here, but when you are getting information from the website, they wouldn't be there if they weren't free use or free domain. So you can click on that text box and just delete it off of there if you so choose. Now, when I'm using my animations, how do I want things to appear on the slide? So I click on animations and I click on animation pane. And so what this does is it allows me to select my objects. So I honestly on this slide have three different objects. I have the title, I have my grouping, let me resize that, of my text, and then I also have this image. So do I want to animate everything on my slide, or what do I want to appear? So again, don't animate everything on a slide. So I'm going to leave the title alone. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the picture. So I could click on this picture, and what do I want to have happen with that picture? We have entrances, we have emphasis, we have exits. And so you could go ahead and have that picture float in. So it just floats in. You can go to Effect Options, and what do you want to do in terms of timing? So I can click on timing. Do I want it to float in fast? Do I want it to float in slow? Do I want it to go extremely slow? Probably not. So maybe I want it to come in slow. So I click on slow and choose OK. And now it's going to slowly appear from the bottom. You can also change how that animation will appear if you want to. You can look at those effect options. You can go to the timing. Do you want it to repeat? What do you want it to do? So we're just going to have that slowly come in from the bottom. You can have it float up, you can have it float down. I think floating up in this case is probably better. Then we have our text to deal with. So right now, anytime you add an animation, you can go preview what it's going to look like. If I come down here to the slideshow under the view buttons, it's going to play just this slide. So I click on it. There's the transition. Here's the animation. Now, I like the way that the picture just appears on the slide. What I'm not happy with is that the bulleted items are there. So if I wanted to talk about each one of these resumes individually, I only want that one bullet to be on there to start with. And so what I'm going to do is we'll end the show and go back to that slide, and I'm going to click on the grouping for the text. And with this one, I want these items to fly in, and I want those items, I'm going to click the drop down next to Effect Options, I want them to fly in from the left because that's the direction that the slide is coming from. So again, those items are going to come in based on a mouse click. I'm not setting any timing to my presentations, and I don't expect you to do so either. So again, once I have an animation set, I want to preview it. So I click on the Run button so I can preview it. So the resume appears. I can talk about chronological resume and let people know what I think. Then I can talk about functional resume. Again, this is all occurring with a mouse click. Then I can do a hybrid resume. And so again, it just becomes your personal style. I will right click and end the show, and maybe you want the picture to come in after you've talked about the different types of resumes. And so if you wanted to do that, all you would have to do is click and drag your item to be down below. And so now when I play this presentation, I can talk about chronological resumes. I can talk about functional resumes. I can talk about hybrid resumes. And to end with that slide, here comes the resume. So again, that's animation. And you don't want to animate everything on a slide. If I go to slide 3, I will probably simply choose to animate the information that's on here. So again, being consistent, flying in, click Effect Options, want it coming in from the left. And then if I go to the last slide, probably not going to have any animation on that slide. So that gives you a little bit of insight into animations and transitions when you're working with your PowerPoint presentations.